blue whales are the largest animals to have ever existed on Earth. Not just the largest alive today, the largest ever. Bigger than any dinosaur, bigger than any shark, bigger than anything that has ever moved, breathed, or eaten on this planet. Their hearts are the size of small cars. Their tongues weigh as much as elephants. A human could literally swim through their arteries. And yet, despite being able to swallow approximately 500 kilograms or 1,100 pounds of krill in a single gulp, that's the weight of a grand piano, by the way, these absolute units cannot physically swallow something as small as a grape. And I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous. How can an animal that weighs up to 200 tons and regularly inhales enough water to fill 3 school buses in one mouthful struggle with something you can buy at a grocery store for $3.99? Well, as it turns out, the answer is way weirder than you'd think, and it all starts with what might be the most unfortunate throat in the animal kingdom. Now, when most people think about blue whales, they imagine this massive creature with an equally massive mouth just vacuuming up everything in its path. I mean, that makes sense, right? The biggest animal ever should have the biggest everything. And in some ways, that's actually true. A blue whale's mouth can be up to 5 meters or 16 feet wide when fully opened. That's wider than the wingspan of most small aircraft. Their jaws can open nearly 90 degrees, creating a mouth cavity large enough to hold 90 tons of water and food combined, equivalent to the weight of about 13 African elephants all crammed into one space. So basically, if you could somehow park a city bus inside a blue whale's mouth, you'd still have room left over for, I don't know, maybe a motorcycle or two. And when they're feeding, blue whales use something called lunge feeding, which is exactly as dramatic as it sounds. They accelerate toward a dense patch of krill, these tiny shrimp-like creatures that are only about 2 centimeters or 0.8 inches long and then basically transform their entire body into a living net. Their throat, which normally looks relatively normal for a whale, suddenly expands like a biological accordion thanks to these pleated grooves called ventral throat pleats that run from their chin all the way down to their belly button. We're talking about a throat that can expand from the diameter of a beach ball to literally the size of a small bedroom in seconds. It's like if your neck suddenly inflated to the size of your entire living room every time you took a bite of food, which would be completely bonkers but is just a normal Tuesday for a blue whale. So, picture this. You've got an animal that can open its mouth wide enough to park a car inside with a throat that can temporarily become the size of your living room, hunting prey by essentially becoming a biological trash compactor that scoops up ocean water like it's trying to drink the entire sea through a straw. Their mouths are so big that their tongues alone weigh about 2.7 tons or 6,000 pounds. That's literally heavier than most full-grown elephants. And no offense to elephants, but imagine having a tongue that weighs more than an elephant. That's the kind of absurd scale we're dealing with here. You'd think with all that space, with all that water, with all that biological engineering designed to consume massive quantities of food, that a blue whale could easily swallow something the size of a grape. Actually, you'd think it could accidentally swallow a grape without even noticing. Like a grape should be to a blue whale what a single grain of rice is to us. Basically invisible, a non-event. Something that would just slide right down without any issue whatsoever. And yet, despite all of this impressive anatomy, despite being the largest mouth attached to the largest animal that has ever lived, a blue whale's actual throat, the part that connects the mouth to the stomach, tells a very different story. Because here's where things get interesting. Here's the thing that absolutely nobody tells you about blue whales. Their esophagus, the actual tube that connects their mouth to their stomach, is only about 10 centimeters or 4 inches in diameter. Let me put that into perspective for you. The largest animal to ever exist, an animal that can weigh 200 tons and measure up to 30 meters or 98 feet long, has a throat roughly the size of a grapefruit. Actually, scratch that. It's smaller than a grapefruit. It's about the size of a salad plate. A blue whale, which has a heart the size of a golf cart, has a throat that is smaller than the diameter of a standard dinner plate. And no offense to blue whales, but that is absolutely ridiculous. So when I said they can't swallow a grape, I was actually being generous. Depending on the size of the grape and the individual whale, some blue whales might struggle with anything larger than an orange. In fact, Researchers have found that the maximum diameter of prey a blue whale can actually swallow is somewhere between 10 to 15 centimeters, or about 4 to 6 inches. That means the largest animal ever is effectively limited to eating things smaller than a softball. It's like if you could only eat individual grains of rice, but your mouth was big enough to fit an entire Thanksgiving turkey. The proportions make absolutely no sense. Now you might be wondering, how did this happen? How did evolution create the biggest animal ever and then give it what is essentially a biological choke point? Well, to understand that, we need to go back about 50 million years to when whales first started their journey from land-dwelling mammals to ocean-dwelling behemoths. See, the ancestors of blue whales, creatures like Pachycetus and Ambulocetus, were relatively small deer-sized animals that hunted fish along coastlines. These early proto-whales had teeth, they chewed their food, and they had normal-sized throats for normal-sized meals. But as these animals gradually evolved and adapted to a fully aquatic lifestyle, something interesting happened. Around 30 to 35 million years ago, a group of whales started to develop baleen instead of teeth. Baleen, if you don't know, is basically biological bristles made of keratin, the same stuff your fingernails are made of. Think of it like a giant comb hanging from the roof of the whale's mouth. And this evolutionary development completely changed the game. Instead of chasing down individual fish and chomping them one by one, these whales could now filter feed on massive swarms of tiny prey. It was like switching from hunting individual rabbits to harvesting an entire field of wheat in one pass. Way more efficient, at least in theory. And here's where it all comes together. Blue whales didn't evolve to eat big things. They evolved to eat lots of very small things. Specifically, they evolved to eat krill, tiny crustaceans that are only about 1 to 2 centimeters, or 0.4 to 0.8 inches long. A single Antarctic krill weighs about 1 gram. That's lighter than a paperclip. And a blue whale needs to eat about 4,000 kilograms, or 8,800 pounds of these things every single day during feeding season. That's roughly 40 million individual krill per day. So in other words, blue whales said, you know what? I'm going to become the biggest thing that has ever lived, and I'm going to do it by eating something smaller than your thumb, and I'm going to need to eat approximately 40 million of them daily. Absolutely unhinged behavior. Honestly. So now you're probably thinking, okay, small throat eats tiny things, I get it. But here's where things get truly bizarre, because the blue whale's entire feeding strategy is basically the most inefficient thing nature has ever designed. And yet somehow it works better than almost any other feeding strategy on the planet. Let me explain. When a blue whale finds a dense swarm of krill, it accelerates to speeds of up to 20 kilometers per hour or 12 miles per hour, which doesn't sound that fast until you remember this thing weighs as much as 30 elephants. That's like if your house suddenly started sprinting at you. Then it opens its mouth, and in about 10 seconds, it engulfs somewhere between 50 to 70 tons of water. That's approximately 50,000 to 70,000 liters, or 13,000 to 18,500 gallons. To put that in perspective, the average in-ground swimming pool holds about 75,000 liters. So in 10 seconds, a blue whale swallows almost an entire swimming pool's worth of water. Just absolutely inhales it. But wait, it gets weirder. After the whale takes in this absolutely stupid amount of water, it needs to filter it all back out through its baleen to trap the krill. And this is where the physics get absolutely wild. The whale closes its mouth and then uses its tongue, which remember weighs about 2.7 tons or 6,000 pounds, roughly the weight of a female elephant, to push all that water back out through the baleen plates. This process takes about 60 to 90 seconds, so let's do the math here. The whale spends enormous amounts of energy accelerating its massive body to high speeds, then expends even more energy expanding its throat to ridiculous proportions, then uses a tongue that weighs as much as a full-grown elephant to squeeze tens of thousands of gallons of water through what is essentially a biological spaghetti strainer, all to catch maybe 30 to 40 kilograms or 65 to 90 pounds of krill in a single gulp. That's it. All of that effort for what amounts to maybe 0.02% of their body weight in food. And here's the really crazy part. This feeding method, this absolutely bonkers strategy of eating microscopic prey with a body designed for a kaiju, is so energetically expensive that it actually takes more calories to perform a single feeding lunge than the whale will get from the krill in that lunge. Let me say that again. Every single time a blue whale feeds, it operates at a caloric deficit. Every single time. It's like if every time you went to the grocery store, you burned more calories driving there and shopping than you got from the food you bought. It makes no sense whatsoever. So how do they survive? Well, blue whales have figured out the ultimate volume business model. They only feed in areas where krill density is absolutely insane. We're talking swarms so dense that the ocean looks pink from above. In these super dense patches, a blue whale can filter about 480 kilograms or 1,060 pounds of krill per hour. At about 1 calorie per gram of krill, that's 480,000 calories per hour. And during peak feeding season in Antarctic waters, a blue whale can feed for up to 6 hours a day, consuming roughly 3 million calories daily. For comparison, the average human needs about 2,000 calories per day, so a blue whale eats what 1,500 humans would eat. Every single day, just to maintain that massive body that exists solely to eat tiny shrimp. But we still haven't fully answered why the throat is so ridiculously small. And this is where scientists have some theories, but no definitive answers. The leading hypothesis is that the small esophagus is actually a safety mechanism. See, if a blue whale accidentally swallowed something large, like, say, a seal or a large fish, or even a chunk of ice, it could potentially block the airway or cause internal damage. The narrow throat essentially acts like a biological filter separate from the baleen, ensuring that only appropriately sized prey makes it to the stomach. It's evolution's way of saying, hey, I know you have a massive mouth, but let's not get crazy here. There's also a structural reason. That throat needs to be strong enough to withstand the immense pressure of squeezing tens of thousands of liters of water back out through the mouth. A wider, more flexible esophagus might not be able to handle the forces involved. It's like how a pressure washer needs a narrow, reinforced hose. If you tried to use a wider, thinner hose, it would just explode under the pressure. And the last thing you want is your throat exploding every time you eat lunch, which I think we can all agree on. Now, this whole tiny throat situation might seem like just a weird quirk of whale anatomy, but it actually has massive implications for ocean ecosystems. Because blue whales are what we call ecosystem engineers. Their feeding behavior literally shapes the environment around them. When a blue whale eats those 40 million krill per day, it's not just feeding itself, it's also pooping. And whale poop, yes, we're going there, is actually incredibly important. Blue whales feed at depth on krill, then come to the surface to breathe and, well, do their business. This creates what scientists call a whale pump, where nutrients from the deep ocean are brought to the surface in the form of massive fecal plumes. These nutrients feed phytoplankton, which feed krill, which feed whales. It's a beautiful circle of life that starts with enormous animals that can't swallow grapes, and ends with literal tons of whale poop fertilizing the ocean. And here's where it gets personal for us. The blue whale's filter feeding strategy, with all its limitations and inefficiencies, has actually inspired human engineering. The grooved, expandable throat structure has been studied extensively by engineers trying to design more efficient underwater robots and water filtration systems. There's literally a field of research called biomimicry, where people try to copy the whale's throat expansion mechanism for industrial applications. So basically, we looked at an animal that operates at a caloric deficit every time it eats, and went, yeah, we should copy that. Additionally, the baleen filtering system has inspired new approaches to microplastic collection from oceans. If a blue whale can filter 50 tons of water in 10 seconds to catch things smaller than your pinky nail, maybe we can design similar systems to filter out the tiny plastic particles polluting our oceans. Researchers at institutions like the Scripps Institution of Oceanography are actively developing filtration systems based on baleen structure, which is honestly pretty cool when you think about it. The other wild thing is that despite being the largest animal ever, blue whales almost went extinct because of us. In the early 1900s, industrial whaling nearly wiped them out entirely. We went from an estimated 350,000 blue whales worldwide to fewer than 5,000 by the 1960s. And the reason we could hunt them so effectively? Ironically, because they're so specialized. Blue whales can only feed efficiently in very specific locations with very dense krill swarms, which made them predictable and easy to find. Their biggest strength became their greatest weakness. Today, Populations have recovered to somewhere between 10,000 to 25,000 individuals, but they're still endangered. And climate change is shifting krill distributions, potentially forcing blue whales to travel farther and work harder for less food, all while still being unable to swallow anything bigger than a softball. Recent studies from 2023 have shown that krill swarms in the Southern Ocean are moving deeper and becoming less dense, which means blue whales are having to make even more of those energy deficit lunges just to get the same amount of food. It's like if your grocery store kept moving farther away and reducing its inventory while you still needed to eat the same amount. Except you're the size of a Boeing 737 and you can only eat one very specific type of tiny shrimp. So let's circle back to where we started. Why can't a blue whale, an animal so large that its heart alone weighs 400 pounds, whose tongue weighs as much as an elephant, whose mouth can hold an entire school bus, swallow something as simple as a grape? Because evolution doesn't optimize for what makes sense to us. It optimizes for what works. And what works for blue whales is being absolutely incredible at one very specific thing: eating approximately 40 million tiny crustaceans per day. Everything else, the massive body, the enormous mouth, the expandable throat, the tongue that weighs as much as a car, is all in service of that one goal. The small esophagus isn't a design flaw, it's a feature. It's the safety valve that keeps the whole system from catastrophically failing. It's the reason blue whales can eat swimming pools full of water without accidentally swallowing a dolphin or choking on a chunk of ice. In a way, blue whales are the ultimate specialists. They gave up the ability to eat anything bigger than a dinner plate in exchange for becoming the most efficient krill-eating machines on the planet. And that specialization allowed them to grow larger than any animal in Earth's history. They're so good at one thing that they became the biggest thing ever. Which is honestly kind of inspiring when you think about it, even if that one thing is eating microscopic shrimp at a caloric loss. So the next time you're eating grapes, maybe take a second to appreciate the fact that you can do something the largest animal to ever exist cannot. You can swallow grapes without your throat saying absolutely not. You can eat a hamburger. You can swallow a cherry tomato. You can consume food items larger than 4 inches in diameter, which might not seem like a big deal until you remember that the biggest animal ever can't do that. And if that doesn't make you feel at least a little bit special, I don't know what will. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember, being the biggest doesn't always mean being the best at everything. Sometimes it just means you're really, really good at one weird thing. And sometimes that weird thing is eating 40 million tiny shrimp per day while being unable to swallow a grape.